Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Deutsch from Better Sports Network and a board member of the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association. We're here with Rick Wolf, founder of Full Moon Sports and a founding board member of the FSGA. We've been producing a series of videos to clear up some of the confusions between fantasy sports and sports betting. Today, we talk about terminology, and we've got the perfect person to do it. Rick, why is this important?
Well, the main reason it's important is because of the confusion that it creates when you do get definitions wrong. Some definitions are sports betting, some definitions are fantasy sports, and others are just about contests in general. And so understanding what they are both legally and the way we should be saying them can help people understand how to use them better and to make things less confusing for the general public, for legislators, and for regulators.
Let's get started with our terms. Fantasy team.
A fantasy team is a group of players or athletes who are put together by a participant.
Fantasy leagues.
Fantasy leagues is a group of fantasy teams.
Challenges or championships.
Now, this is one that I struggle with a little bit because there's been many names about it over the years, but it is when the prizes are then given out to an entire group of people, but those people play in leagues before they play in those. So they've been called challenges, they've been called championships, like the World Championship of Fantasy Football, which was the original one Emil Kadlec created. But those kinds of things are either challenges or championships.
This is a big one. The definition of fantasy sports games.
Yeah, and this is a big one because it's hard for people to understand. And so many people have been just looking at things and saying, well, this looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, so it should be a duck. But the reality is the federal guidelines for fantasy sports games is clear, like crystal clear, outlined in the safe harbor of the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act in 2006. A fantasy entry into a fantasy contest cannot involve a team or teams. It must be made up of amateur and or pro players. It must establish prizes in advance. They have to be made in advance. It must be predominantly skill-based. Must have winners determined by the results of those athletes in real-world events. And it must have winners not based on the score, point spread, or the single real-world team's outcome. And it must have winners not based solely on a single performance of any entity in a single world event.
Entry fee.
Okay, an entry fee, it's only used in sports contest play. This is not used in sports betting. Okay, that includes, of course, fantasy sports game. It is a fee that is paid for your entry fee in order to compete in that game of skill.
What about service fees?
Service fee is only used in sports contests also. And sometimes this is confused, but it is a fee that is paid to the contest operator for administering a contest like a fantasy sports game.
Here's one we've all heard a lot of recently, parlay.
Okay, parlay is only a sports betting term. This is one of the ones that confuses people. Do not name your company Parlay Fantasy Sports. That's just a broken name. A parlay is a bet type, specifically a bet type, where two or more bets are combined into one bet for a greater payout. So the fact that it contains the word bet in it means that it has nothing to do with fantasy sports.
We've all heard prop bet. Is that exclusive to sports betting?
Prop bet is exclusive to sports betting. It's a bet that is not directly related to the final score or the outcome of the game. So it doesn't have to be a player, and that's one of the confusions that's happened in recent time. It can be anything. It can be how many songs will the Weeknd play in the halftime show? What will the coin flip be? How many times will they show Taylor Swift at the Super Bowl? So those kinds of things can be prop bets, but it's clearly a bet. And if it's a bet or a wager, then it's not a fantasy game.
Odds were pretty good that I was going to ask you about the next term. What are odds?
Well played. All right. Odds only exist in sports betting. Obviously, probability is, you can say that the probability of winning a fantasy sports game, that's different. The odds of winning, let's say. But the odds specifically is a number assigned to a sports bet based on the probability of that specific outcome. So in this case, odds is only used in sports betting.
Money line.
All right, money line is only a sports betting term also. It refers to a bet where you choose a team in a matchup to win outright. Team has to win outright, and then you win your wager based on the odds placed against that money line.
Here's one I'd love to hear the definition of, rake.
Okay, rake is not a sports betting term. It's also not a fantasy sports term, even though some fantasy sports companies still continue to have it on their websites. I would personally like to see those removed. Rake is used in poker to describe the amount of money that's taken out of the pot, is raked out of the pot by the operator to run the game. It's that simple. It's not used in fantasy sports, not in sports betting.
What about juice?
Juice, this is my favorite one because it's newish. And I say newish because it used to be called vigorish. So it's the same thing as the vig, short for vigorish. It's the percentage deducted from the gambler's winnings by the organizers of the game or the taker of bets. Since it's the taker of bets, it has to be sports betting because there are no bets in fantasy sports.
What about the house?
The house refers to those who offer the bet and take the juice. So this is exclusively a sports betting term. We've heard this thrown around a lot. They're playing against the house. When you make an entry into a fantasy contest, you're not playing against the house, even if you're playing against a computer that created odds for you to take multiple players on multiple teams in multiple games within your pick'em.
Thank you, Rick. We hope this helps people understand the terminology and differences between fantasy sports and sports betting, which are both fun and both make the games more fun to watch. Have more fun. Play fantasy sports.